Transportation for Massachusetts is fighting for you to get from point A to point B. The statewide coalition works to improve the Bay State's transportation systems with a big focus on equity. Their efforts look at the bigger picture of transit and how a reliable ride connects people to housing, jobs, healthcare, and so much more. Joining me now is Reggie Ramos, Executive Director of Transportation for Massachusetts.
Thanks,
Thank you so much for
Jessica.
being here.
Thanks, Jessica, for having me.
Absolutely. This is an important conversation, so I'm glad we're here to talk about this because I know your coalition believes in strength in numbers. Why is coalition building so essential to what you do?
I think in many ways it's essential because it represents sort of a large swath of diversity of the Commonwealth, but also the differing interests of folks, right? We all know that transportation sort of underpins our struggles with housing, public health, climate, all of that. So I think having a collection or constellation, as I would like to call them, members from across the state. We have members from Springfield, Greater Boston area, the Berkshires, the Hill Towns, the Cape, all represent local interests that need to be lifted up. And I think that's the beauty of a coalition. And also, I think that in our coalition, we put a premium to what transportation does. We believe that transportation is central to our struggles in the cost of living. And it's a huge, huge indicator for our quality of life.
Absolutely. What are the top issues, transportation issues, that are impacting people in Greater Boston?
One is safety. The other piece is affordability. We just recently, the MBTA in the last few years has implemented what is called means-tested fares, or the income-eligible low fares, reduced fares, which has changed the game for people to have access to transportation. We've also seen in the regional transit agencies like MEVA, for example, or the Worcester RTA or WRTA, we've seen them go fare-free in the last couple of years thanks to the millionaire's tax or fair share. That's one issue. But still, even with those kinds of things, Jessica, if you look at, the cost of driving into Boston, right, compared to taking public transit, which we know is, has a positive impact. It's still, if you're living from Lynn, for example, it's still, people still choose to travel via car, even if there is a public transit available, because it'll probably just cost them somewhere from $5, whereas going in via the commuter rail is going to cost them $12. So there is this kind of trade-off that we need to reckon with. And then the other pieces are, simple accessibility. Like, people with disabilities deserve to access our transportation. And then there's the larger picture of sort of like transportation funding. We know from, this is a yearly exercise now that we have the MBTA saying they're going to on a fiscal cliff. And there's this rush to save the MBTA for good reason, right? But we need to come out of that cycle. We really seriously need to do that. And then there's, the MBTA has a $24 billion deficit in terms of state of good repair. That's really something to think about. Roads and bridges, our roads and bridges have been ranked and graded D+. So I think, really looking at the broader point of view, there's an issue of funding, there's an issue of lack of service, a lack of connectivity. I mean, just going to the studio, right? Coming from the Boston office, our Boston office, it's quite difficult to catch like less than an hour commute. So yeah, you're compelled to use the car instead of public transit.
Well, you just touched on it. So what are some other pressing transportation problems you're seeing in Eastern Mass outside of Boston?
So for instance, there's, let's use MEVA for example, and we know this from the latest news, right? This lack of service during weekends. We also know from the South Coast Rail, for instance, the connection between buses and the new South Coast Rail commuter rail, the scheduling of buses to take folks coming out of the commuter rail into downtown New Bedford, for instance, is not necessarily in sync at the moment, or there's a gap in sort of the bus service going into the train station or the commuter rail station. So these are like symptomatic or emblematic of a lack of connection. And this can be a function of, one, obviously still funding, but in the way that we have structurally sort of planned our transportation as a state.
You want everyone to have access to public transit, clearly, right? No matter where they live. What policies are you advocating for to make that happen?
So we have always been at the forefront of fare freeze in the RTAs. We believe that it is crucial for folks to be able to access transit, especially those who are transit dependent. These are folks who cannot afford to buy a car. By the way, to maintain and buy a car costs an average resident, Massachusetts residents, $14,000 a year. That is a huge burden. So we've always pushed for fare freeze on the RTAs. The other piece is, like I said, means tested on the MBTA. We're also pushing for sort of, looking at safety in design.
Speaking of safety, street safety I know is a big conversation, especially in Boston right now. But it's also an issue across the state.
Yes.
So what changes, in your view, can be made to make our roads safer for everyone, cyclists included?
There is a pending legislation right now on Beacon Hill that seeks to implement road safety cameras to deter sort of, speeding. But the other piece of that, Jessica, and just looping it back to safety, is that speeding is a function of design. We have designed our streets to invite speeding. And we have to reverse that. We need to design our streets to invite everyone to have access to use to it. And that means children can cross safely. How do you design a road that takes to account that a person in a wheelchair will probably need to cross the street, but at the same time, a mom using, a stroller, but also, realizing the sort of urban necessity of using a car. So all these needs to be accounted for. There are a lot of ways and levers that we have at our disposal. I think it's a matter of also political will to kind of get us there. But what is important is for the community to really say and be at the center of decision making and say, this is what our neighborhoods need.
Yeah, the coalition I know also hosts events that give you a chance to get out into the community. Those include ride-alongs, which help you experience transit across the state in real time. What perspective do these events give you, and what have you been hearing?
Oh my God, it's amazing. So for the last 3 years, we've been hosting what we call a ride-along. So it depends on the neighborhood. So I'll give you an example that we just recently had. We went to Brockton. We work with a community-based organization who's also a member. And we decided we wanted to, the community said, can we do a ride along with the administrator of BAT, with Brockton Area Transit? And we had Administrator Mike Lambert join us, and he had us on a bus. And the exchange in the bus between community members and the administrators was so, it was so meaningful that they were able to understand, the community was able to understand the complexities of running transit, but at the same time, it opened this door for both parties to kind of have a trusting relationship, so that the transit service provider actually understand the service that's needed. And this is an invaluable exercise that we want to replicate throughout the state.
You're getting everyone to understand each other, which is so important.
Exactly.
Reggie Ramos, we appreciate you being here and for having this conversation and the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you. Well, still to come, a bold idea to address decades-old disparities, how some Boston leaders are hoping to fill a critical transit gap.